Oh. Forward to this tomorrow. Okay, and pause. We are very pleased to have as our speaker today, Nestor Ravilas. And his title for his talk today is going to be Power, Glory, and Wealth, the Perennial Evolution of Empire and the Enchantment of the Christian Movement. Nestor is a struggling public theologian from the Philippines. He and a small community, Penuel School of Theology, are deeply committed to the legacy and of the historical Jesus, particularly on the memory of his struggle and resistance to all forms of oppressive and exploitative power. Albeit unpopular and an uncompromising path, Nestor and Penuel chose to remain faithful to this legacy despite the enfeebling challenges they face in the seriously injured nation due to its long history of military subjugation and its seemingly unending economic and political colonialization. And so with that, Nestor, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's evening here. It's around 9 p.m. here. So let me share my screen. Let's proceed directly to my presentation. Where is my presentation? Here. Okay, do you see it?
Yeah, we do see it. You can
Okay,
put it in patient mode if you want by clicking on the bottom right screen there.
The bottom right screen.
Right at the bottom to the right. A little bit to the right. No, I lost your mouse. Yeah, just a little bit lower.
This one.
A little bit closer to the right. No, go right. Go right. Go right. There. That's it. Click that one.
This one.
Yeah,
okay, I got it. I got it. Finally.
There we go. We got it. Good.
Okay, let me proceed then. Power, glory, and wealth, the perennial evolution of empire and the enchantment of the Christian movement. Let me start this presentation or lecture by describing the world we live in today. No, please don't be terrified. This will not take a week. I know it will take some time to adequately describe the world today, but I will try to be a little discreet and make it rather sufficiently short or brief. How should I describe the world? There are many ways actually to do it. The best way to do it is to be selective of those social phenomena that bear immeasurable impacts in the future of this planet. I hate, however, sounding like a prophet of doom by flooding you with all the garbage this world has produced in the recent past. I wish to take a more positive stance and highlight good and beneficial things around us, such as those remarkable developments in technology, including the amazing rapid progress in artificial intelligence, excuse me, of which such feats are all motivated by the altruistic desire to make human existence not only bearable, but enjoyable at the same time. Unfortunately, things that are perceived to be boon to humanity are felt in the same way as having adverse effects in our society in the long run. The threat of replacing and displacing human labor by artificial intelligence and the great chance of this technological power to fall under the command of mad politicians are possibilities that scare us most. And worst is the impending environmental collapse due to this incessant progress and development. To be inauspicious but honest, I think is the duty that I should rather pursue here. Having said that, let me then turn to what I consider is the most telling condition of the world today. The World Inequality Report of 2022 says that the richest 10% of the global population, takes 52% of the global income. We're talking of income here. So around 52% belongs to the 10 richest population of the of the global population. Whereas the poorest 50% of the population, global population, earns around 8.5% of those global income. On wealth assessment, on the other hand, the report says that the richest 10% of the global population own 70% of all wealth. So the global wealth is owned by 10% of the global population, 70% of the global wealth. While the poorest 50% of the global population barely owns any wealth at all, possessing just 2% of the total wealth of the world, the entire world, around 2%, owns by the 50% global population. This global report validates another report issued by Oxfam. I know it is a British-based developmental institution organization. In the same year, claiming that the wealth of the 10th richest men has doubled, while the incomes of 99% of humanity are worse off. And all this happened in the middle of the pandemic crisis of COVID-19. This was report issued in 2022 also. Local reports say the same thing. Here in my country, in the Philippines, the same dismal inequality explains the massive poverty in the country. Ibon Foundation, a local development NGO, non-government organization, reported in February 2021 that 66% of Filipino families are earning below $438 US. And that is barely 5,000 pesos. And if you happen to live here for a while, you know that 5,000 pesos could not sustain a family of 5 or 6 just for a week. So that's really impossible. While the 0.04% of the super rich have a monthly income of over $1 million US dollars. In the middle 29% earning between the high range of 1,250 a month, US dollars a month. These reports on global income and wealth inequality may look like mere numbers or mere statistics on many of us. But for people who live in the majority of the world, the hunger, poverty, and destitution it entails is really terrifying. Let us live for a while and let us leave this for a while and let us turn to Jesus for a moment. For a time, I was seriously thinking, how did Jesus respond to the imperial presence of the Romans in his land? Our received tradition tends to depoliticize Jesus, much that we have removed him from his imperial context. But historical facts say that before Jesus was Christianized by the West, he was a Jew, a Galilean Jew in particular, who lived in the height of the powerful Roman Empire that reigned over the Mediterranean area for about 500 years. With this, I was wondering then, how did he respond, Jesus? No? How did Jesus respond with this colonizing power? What was his attitude towards the invading foreigners and their local retainers who assisted the Romans in exploiting and oppressing their own people? Did Jesus say anything against or in favor of the ruling empire? Contrary to what I was expecting, when I started working in this project, I actually discovered many incidents where Jesus was seen challenging the Roman Empire. Initially, I made 6 items in this section, which I can even raise to a few more, but I have to cut them to 3 so as not to hold you here the whole day. So here they are. First, against tributes and taxation. Jesus had only one recorded incident addressing directly Caesar or the Romans. And that incident was surprisingly connected to imperial taxation. The lone incident was preserved not only in all synoptic gospels, but in the Gospel of Judas and in Papyrus Egerton II as well, or 2 as well. The seeming ubiquity of the story prompts Sean Frame to suggest that the inherent importance of the story among the early communities of Jesus' followers. Consider, for instance, the surprising uniqueness of the story, its remarkable peculiarity, and its popularity despite its obvious oddity. Do not only support Frame's opinion, but suggest at the same time the controversy surrounding the practice of imperial taxation. Michael Given, in his illuminating book, The Archaeology of the Colonized, helped us understand this controversy when he claims that imperial taxation is the heart of colonization. taxes and tributes do not only exploit and abuse the colonized by seizing away portion of peasants' stable food, but an enfeebling sign that one was subjected under the yoke of foreign domination. If that is the case, the question whether it is right for the Jews to pay taxes to Caesar or not is essentially an inquiry on Jesus' opinion on the presence of foreign power in his land. Jesus, who was fully aware that taxation is a delicate matter under imperial rule, knows that any reckless response could either ignite another round of uprising, or he will be thrown right away in the jail on the charges of sedition before he could trigger another insurrection. An arrest of a popular leader, however, could lead as well to another mass agitation. Either way will be bloody, like those uprising in the past triggered by this oppressive tax exaction. The question, however, puts Jesus before the public eyes, where he was compelled to respond, despite the fact that the inquiry was offered as a trap. Discretion, therefore, is needed to avoid bloodshed. Thus, he cryptically responded by saying, "Give to Caesar things belong to Caesar, and to God things belong to God," which actually was not mysterious at all, since the Jews who shared this worldview knew well that what Jesus meant by that, with that. Far from providing a foundational theory on the doctrine of the separation of church and state, which the story has been erroneously used, what Jesus meant actually is that as far as the Sinai covenant is concerned, the land and everything in it is owned and belonged to God and was given as a gift to the covenantal people of Israel. With that, nothing therefore in the land should be delivered to Caesar. In a very clever way, Jesus strikes the empire and is very hard. Second, against feudal lords. For a reason that remains baffling, God terribly gets furious in the parable of Jesus found in Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. For the seemingly innocuous decision of the rich man to pull down his old barns in order to build bigger ones to house his huge harvest. Wasn't the man's action considered admirable, which speaks of good stewardship by making sure that all the blessings he gets are properly handled and perfectly secured? But God, who has the reputation of going overboard at times with his temper, swears to slay the man instantly in anger. So goes with the perplexing question, why would God do such a horrendous thing? With explanation seemingly lacking in the story, we are left wondering what the divine brutality means to us. In looking for answers, we seldom fail to wonder, how did the man acquire such a great harvest under the double context of imperial oppression and exploitation? Could it be possible that the rich man was simply a caricature of a feudal imperial broker who was among those bestowed with privileges for managing and operating the imperial institutions of plunder, and was therefore rewarded abundantly in exchange of his service and fealty to the imperial lord? Large agricultural land holdings were usually given as rewards to the services of imperial local agents, and their treacherous connivance with the empire earned them with more power, which they deftly used to enlarge these land holdings through various exploitative means such as loans, mortgages, and even direct land grabbing. Along with this is another sinister condition looming within the layers of the story. A prospect of great harvest will definitely require an immense labor force to make it done, which suggests therewith another horrific truth of the availability of massive army of labor of disenfranchised Jews who probably lost their agricultural lands through one or two of the predatory methods mentioned above, and thereby forced to sell out their labor to these local feudal lords in order to feed their starving families. The rule is simple. The more properties one has grabbed and possessed means more people are being dispossessed of theirs. In this regard, no other way for any man to amass such abundant wealth under imperial rule without having engaged in these exploitative and abusive mechanisms. Only in this context, God's decision to slay the rich man right there and then could be understood and justified. The divine terror was exhibited to sternly remind those who were listening to the parable that God despises anyone who engages in any repressive and predatory practices. Third one, against imperial intermediaries. There is tension among scholars whether or not Jesus had maligned the Jerusalem temple and threatened to destroy it. What was certain, on the other hand, is that Jesus was critical of it. Reason for this is because the priest and the high priest came down to history as client rulers of imperial Rome. When the Judean returns from the Babylon exile in 539 BCE, the temple replaced the Davidic monarchy as the political institution of the land. The temple technically ruled on behalf of the empire that colonized Judah. Along with the governor sent by the imperial lord, imperial bureaucracy will never be effective without the assistance of political agents and brokers, especially when a colony was too distant from the imperial capital like the Jewish Palestine. The local elites therefore mediated the imperial enterprise and managed the institution of plunder in exchange of power, privileges, and protection as reward for their betrayal. It made them filthy rich and secured a life in prime cities like Jerusalem, Tiberias, and Sepphoris, where the rich and the powerful ensconced themselves. Although the corruption of the temple leadership could have started way before Herod, on the other hand, was blamed for its total decline. The office of the high priest had been a source of lucrative income as it was being sold to the highest bidder, which made non-qualified and even those in diaspora occupy the post. The temple people then in the 1st century Palestine served as client rulers to imperial power, which made them targets of disgruntled Jewish peasants. One certain high priest named Jonathan was assassinated by the Saccharite, and during the height of the Jewish Great War in 66 CE, the mansion of the high priest were among the first structures attacked and burned by the angered mob. Just for emphasis, let me review the imperial practices Jesus hates and opposes. First is exploitation. Imperial practice was primarily to exploit the colony through tribute collection, taxation, rents, forced labor, and supply of local army for the empire's wars of expansion. The Jews under the Roman Empire were subjected to all those repressive and exploitative practices. On taxation and tribute payments alone, scholars are in squabbles as to how much did a Jew pay and give a tax payment to all layers of power, say to the Romans, to Herodians, into the temple. Second one is community disintegration. Due to lack of proper term, I call it this way in the meantime. In most cases, imperial capital never directly rules a colonized area. They rather employ the services of local people, particularly the elite class, to manage the colony in exchange of imperial privileges. The elite class sees this as an opportunity not only to save their own skin, but to advance their own interests, while the dispossessed poor sees them as traitors and enemies of the people. The bad thing is that the interplay of exploitation and distrust was inscribed in a culture of a colonized land that will hunt them even after the imperial presence left the land. Third one is immiseration, poverty. Debate as to how many taxes the Jews paid during the Roman occupation is endless. In the case of Judea, for example, during the time of King Herod, the Jews were subjected to 3 tiers of power: King Herod, the temple, and the imperial capital of Rome. Was every single Jewish family obligated to pay tribute to each of these layers of Judean authority? How many percent of their yearly harvest they paid to each authority? 5, 10, 20, or more? It is hard to imagine one of these powers will waive its shares to tax income, since tax is the lifeblood of the ancient system of power. But let us say, for the sake of discussion, that one of them yields its right for tribute payment. 2 portions of tax cut from the peasant's harvest will remain burdensome, who were most probably farming rented lands owned by imperial agents. With these institutions of plunder placed in colonial territory, where the goal is to concentrate income to the hands of a powerful minority, it is not hard to believe that people suffered and were impoverished. you might be familiar with this slide. In this the world today, this was my introduction. With this short presentation of this attitude with empire, let us go back again to the current condition of the world I've shown you in my introduction. What do we observe with this slide? I've shown you this as my introduction a while ago. What do you observe with this? What do you think of this? Looking through the lens of what we just have discussed about Jesus' struggle with the Roman Empire. This is our world today. These reports make us wonder why wealth inequality, instead of shrinking down, has gone even nastier since the time of Jesus. Why are those who have been pushed to poverty in the institution exponentially increased in number, while the flow of the world's wealth has been concentrated in the hands of a small number of human families? How did it happen? What made it happen? Could it be done by another imperial subjugation and exploitation, since there is no monster capable of such horror other than the brutality of empires? But the Roman Empire is just now part of a distant history. If that is the case, why does the world remain in the agony of the impacts of imperial savagery? History tells us that imperial practice has never ceased from existing even after the fall of the Roman Empire. The Romans eventually were replaced by another empire, and the cycle of falling and rising of empires continues up to the recent history. If that is correct, empires are able to survive the vicissitudes of social history, and therefore could be blamed for the disgusting wealth inequality that pushes the majority population of the world to extreme poverty today, worse probably than the time of Jesus. To understand better how an empire could possibly do such a stunt is to look at the nature of imperial enterprise. It was not the intention of this section to dig deeply into the details of imperial history. A short monograph like this would not do justice to the long and convoluted history of imperial practice. This panoramic overview of empires aims to help us understand what makes this enterprise remarkably tenacious, that it was able to survive attempts to neutralize it. Furthermore, this imperial analysis will help us establish the connection between the Roman world of Jesus in the current world of contemporary Christians. And lastly, this hopefully will help us identify the overriding motivation behind the imperial practice that keeps it alive, growing, and seemingly have gone invincible. First, excuse me. Hi, Bar. My son is making a noise. Let me continue. First is tributary or agrarian empires. It was viewed generally that imperial practice all began when humans shifted from hunting-gathering to agricultural lifestyle. With this change, land was discovered as a source of wealth. Crops, grains, and vegetables were produced, and livestock were sustained by vast grassland. This land-based economy entails that to secure one's existence or to live in the Epicurean lifestyle through plenty of surplus, one has to cover more lands and territories. Territorial expansion became the fad of the day, especially fertile land near water supplies. Inhabited territories are more enticing to invade and occupy, since these territories are already cultivated and farmed by their own inhabitants, original inhabitants. All the colonizing force has to do is to impose taxes, rents, and tributes in forms of either grains or money as imperial rulers of subject territories. The life of the imperial center was sustained by the immiseration of the colonized people. Excuse me. Industrial empires. Tributary empires later were replaced by industrial empires, brought about by the discovery of the steam power. During the period called Industrial Revolution, wealth accumulation was driven primarily by the quest for precious metals and raw materials to support its massive production of commodities, and more markets to dispense the massive production. The wealth of the advanced countries was paid off by the subjugation of the majority world that sustained the demand of Industrial Revolution. What we can fundamentally what we can fundamentally deduce in this brief survey of imperial practice is that empires significantly vary over their practices, particularly in terms of policies, methods, strategies, administration, and on many other aspects. Even those empires that are lumped together along one particular classification differ in the same way on various elements, as the Persian Empire is not exactly the same with the Romans, though both were categorized as tributary or agrarian powers. No empires are exactly the same. With all these variables and disparities among empires, one thing conversely has remained constant. Something has never changed and it stayed intact throughout the gamut of imperial history. As we can observe in the short classification of empires above, what is apparently common to them, despite their variegated practices, is this innate drive for wealth accumulation. Akhil Bilgrami calls this as the invariant element of imperialism. And this was motivates all the exploitative and predatory mechanisms set up by powerful groups to entrap others in an unending spiral of profit production. Let me return to the second time. So again, I'm flashing this slide, which I have shown you in my introduction. Let me return for the second time to this condition of the contemporary world. Obviously, as we can see, the larger portion of the global wealth is concentrated in the hands of a very few numbers of people. Nothing can usher this accumulation of wealth to a limited number of people other than the savagery of empire. But what kind of empire is responsible for this current condition? The world today resembles a crime scene where pieces of evidence of a brutal and terrible crime permeate it. And despite this, you cannot exactly identify what kind of monster committed this heinous crime. But with the manner the crime was carried out, you know the perpetrator was pernicious and fierce. That exactly is our problem here, identifying the monster that created the problem we are facing today. Michael Hard and Antonio Negri both identified the culprit as empire. David Harvey in the same way speak of empire. And at the same time, Utsa Patnaik and Fabat Patnaik attest to the existence of empire. The five among others testify that what we are dealing here is another manifestation of imperial power. But what exactly this empire looks like when they could not even agree on what to call this monster? With this challenge, rather than trying to name it, let me just proceed to describe its power. So I'm going to describe this contemporary empire. First, this empire, it is market capitalism. Where's that? Oh, it is market capitalism. Although some tend to argue that capitalism is not a noble practice, but was actually embedded within imperialism from the moment empires appeared in this planet, it was, however, generally considered as part and parcel of market economy. It is an economic phenomenon where goods produced by labor turn into commodities by comparing it with corresponding price called exchange value. It was in this intricate world of the market that capitalism emerged. In a dialogue with Slavoj Zizek, Yanis Varoufakis said that capitalism requires two things. First, capitalism needs profit, private profit to drive it. And the other thing is that exploitation takes place in the markets. He obviously refers to profit and markets as the two essential elements of capitalism. But he mentioned actually a third element that serves as the decisive factor in the equation. Profit is the gas that drives capitalism. The market is the place where profit is earned. And exploitation is the mechanism perpetuated by those who control the market to maximize profit. To be fair, the rise of the market economy was a promising development in the world's economic system. It was conceived as somehow a game changer in wealth distribution. Although it does not entail perfect equality for all, since production depends on the capacity of each one to produce, the prospect of economic progress, on the other hand, is no longer based on class status or caste system of the feudal society, but on the capacity of everyone to participate in the production. While not everyone is expected to produce the same number of commodities, but all can be part of the production activity, and therefore was given a fair chance to advance oneself towards a better life. Unfortunately, it was averted in an unequal pattern of wealth distribution was insidiously introduced to it. Through exploitative and predatory system, few people who controlled the capital were able to pull in more profit in the market system. As John Rawls aptly observes, that members of the community with conflict of interest are not indifferent as to how the greater benefits produced by their collaboration are distributed. For in order to pursue their ends, they each prefer a larger to a lesser share. To that nature, we can blame why the supposedly altruistic market ended up skewed to make the flow of the largest portion of profit concentrated in the hands of influential and privileged few. How exactly does the manipulation happen in the market? David Harvey simplifies how capitalism is able to manipulate the market. Harvey says that from the perspective of capitalist logic, are typically about exploiting the uneven geographical condition under which capital accumulation occurs, and also taking advantage of what I call the asymmetries that inevitably arise out of spatial exchange relations. Example of this malevolent practice will be given later. The second character is that it is global in power. This contemporary empire is global in power. Hardin Negri's decision to use the word empire with the capital E to differentiate it with imperialism is obviously for the lack of new term to name this contemporary empire power. The decision is due to the fact that it resembles the description of empire in terms of its capacity to exploit the system for wealth accumulation. The old empires, as we have seen, are more colonial in nature, where powerful nation states impose their dominance and power on certain territory in order to exploit it. It is fixed and territorial. The empire with capital E, in which Hardin Negri described as the new sovereign, is characterized fundamentally by the termination of boundaries. Its rule has no limit. What kind of empire, therefore, is not bound by boundaries? Obviously, the empire that is not circumscribed by the territorial boundary of the nation state is the market or economic empire. Significant shift took place during the rise of the market economy that engendered a kind of financial capital that is global in its scope and therefore global in its command. This should not be surprise us after all, since from its very inception, capitalism has always functioned as a world economy. In that narrative was told over and over by Yanis Varoufakis, both in his talks and in books, that capitalism was born when certain commodities such as wool, cotton, steel, and many others were sought in the global market. It does not mean that the national financial capital is really passe. We have them still with us in local political territories. But the inherent freedom of the market gave birth to the pernicious international financial capital. Unlike the traditional territorial empire, this global corporation is not restricted to any territory, and its movement is motivated by the prospect of producing more profit. One feature of this mobility of capital is the transfer of manufacturing plants to the global south, where due to the poverty bequeathed in the past by the land-based and industrial empires, a large reserve of labor army was created, which provides in turn a plethora of supply labor to the global market. This development in the relation of labor and production benefited the capitalists in many ways. They acquired the labor of the reserve army of workers in exchange of cheap wages. In the same way, poses a threat to the workers from advanced countries, that once they jeopardize the interests of the capitalists through various labor demands, either the means of production will be taken away from them and transferred offshore, or migration of cheap labor will swarm in the West to take away their jobs. With this wicked mechanism, wages of workers from advanced countries have suffered doldrums since the last few decades. It controls, the third one, it controls political power. Most authors engaged in the study of this phenomenal global financial order find it a bit difficult to delineating the relationship between market capitalism and the nation-state politics. Many of them, however, agree that the political power of states has weakened over the decades with the global market. It was actually the aim of capitalism to undermine state control so that financial capital can freely move globally. Restriction hampered development, and by relaxing constraints, the market will be left guided alone by the invisible hands towards progress, says libertarian people. That is their argument. But what actually market capitalism wants is not for politics to withdraw its hands in order to create space for the global market to move freely, but rather for politics to throw a mantle of protection to its predatory practices in taking advantage of every uneven geographical condition in asymmetrical relations of exchange. David Harvey correctly describes this relationship in saying that the state, in short, is the political entity that the body politic that is best able to orchestrate these processes. And then he adds, the nation states are compelled to support market capitalism since their own wealth and power depend the same way on its success. It is a matter of collusion between two powers in exploiting the world, especially those placed at the losing end of every asymmetrical and uneven social relations. There is no other place where this connivance between state power and market capitalism is visible other than in my country, the Philippines. Basic services of human needs such as water, electricity, health, and education are virtually privatized. Under the guise of efficient and good services, private corporations now own institutions in industries that supply public basic needs. And the result is the insurmountable spike of prices of goods and services that the poor can barely acquire. Even infrastructures such as bridges, highways, airports, and many others are built and bankrolled by private money under the private-public partnership program of the government, are found in final analysis disadvantageous to the country's well-being. Gas and oil companies are now free from government control through the regulation law. The oil market can decide how much income they wish to accumulate, and no one can monitor them since the Philippine government has tied its own hand to let the giant oil companies decide on their income unregulated by the government. The most recent of this conspiracy was in 2019 when the then President Rodrigo Duterte signed into law Republic Act 11203, or better known as Rice Tarification Law, that canceled the limit on the importation of rice. That means that market players can import rice as much as they wish at the perils of killing the Philippine rice industry itself, and at the same time, the local farmers. Imagine an agricultural country like the Philippines that once led the rice production in Asia in yesteryears will now depend thoroughly from imported rice rather than reviving its prominence in rice production by exploring all assistance it can provide with its own rice industry. Walden Bello, a Filipino intellectual and expert in geopolitics, sees the hands of the World Trade Organization, WTO, behind the passing of this law. If that is true, we see here the collusion of global market, local politics, and other global powers that entrench the exploitation of asymmetrical playing fields, the global market. And I think this is the last one. It is capitalist imperialism. It is capitalist imperialism. The ambivalent relationship between politics and capitalism, or of economic elite and policymakers, I described above, makes David Harvey to name this power as capitalist imperialism. I find this name best describes what Harvey calls contradictory fusion of two powers, rather than the empire with capital E of Hard and Negri, which is essentially confused with the general term empire. After I refused to name the culprit at first and opted rather to describe it, in this closing portion, I decided to go rather with Harvey's name, for it captures the interplay of politics and capitalism that actually makes this power so potent and formidable. This mantle of protection and preservation being provided by the policymakers for all the exploitative and predatory mechanisms makes this power to be reckoned as an empire, capitalist empire, to be politically correct. And to name the monster is to identify what we Christians are supposed to be marching against with. Closing. I'm about to end. Where do Christians, where do we find ourselves in this struggle? As a form of reminder, everything I will say in this concluding part of the presentation, in one way or another, is my observation of my own context and therefore subjective in some sense. This is not the picture of what the global community of Christians are doing in responding to the crisis, I cited in this presentation. I wish that one is clear to everyone. And furthermore, some might be looking for other pertinent issues related to capitalist imperialism, which are not given a fair space in this presentation. Neoliberalism could be one which was not given an adequate space here in order to show how philosophy of freedom is being waged in order to unfetter the market to saturate the entire world with less hindrances. Its touted virtue of consumerism in the discrete production of desire to intensify participation in the market are all drop off in the same way. Some might wonder why seemingly I have not touched on the issue of violence and ignore it completely in this analysis of the condition of the world today. I sincerely acknowledge that violence has its own distinct character, but in most cases, especially in imperial history, violence was in its being employed for the same motivation, the accumulation of wealth. It was therefore used like the rest of imperial apparatuses, especially in that occasion, to serve the same motivation. Let me proceed then on the closing part, which is the Christian witness in the context of this capitalist imperialism. And allow me to just draw in broad stroke the current location in this struggle. You may add more of this, I think, 4 or 5 points I have here. First, although Utsa Patnaik and Pavat Patnaik are right in asserting that in globalization, the segmentation of the world into first and the third is already dissolved, since you can find today billionaires and poor in both worlds. The Christian West, however, remains the main propagator of this uneven and asymmetrical economic arrangement. The rise of mega churches that confer salvation to economic elite while keeping their privileged position as recipients of the rigid economic system is an anomaly to the legacy of the revolutionary Jesus. Third, since the market is designed to be customer-friendly through media propaganda, in the lifestyle it promotes is regarded as the socially accepted trend, churches and other religious groups are enticed to it and ironically played the role as peddlers and conduits of consumerism and market spirituality. The individualization of Christian faith expressed in various religious slogans as personal salvation, personal Lord, personal relationship, in many more resonate well with the individualist spirit of neoliberalism. And last one, the idea of blessings, stewardship, prosperity gospel, and wealth accumulation are in most occasions confused and therefore is suspected as emanating from the same principle. End of my presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nestor. I guess my question is, and this is just, you probably know better than I do. The little I've read of David Harvey, he argues that there's kind of a reverse flow of wealth in the current age, so that, that whereas traditionally things were moving through the imperialist process, goods, services, wealth was moving from Asia, Africa, and Latin America to North America and Europe. And Harvey has argued that there's now a reverse flow. Do you hold to that, or do you think that's a wrong perception of David Harvey?
There is what we call the segmentation of wealth now. Unlike before, you can only divide the global or the planet into the West and the East, Asia. Most of the Asian countries are poor and most of the Western countries are rich. But there is this segmentation now wherein you can now have billionaires in the Philippines. It is really amazing that we can have around 10 families that are billionaires now here. So there is this reverse flow of capital, wherein some as like India and China and even our own country is having now a taste of their own goods in this global capital. So there was this, they call this as segmentation of the capital, or as Harvey would call as reverse flow of the capital.
Yeah, the only reason I ask that is because I lived in Asia for a long time, and there have been, in some countries at least, some changes. So, for instance, the rates of poverty in Malaysia have gone down, and the overall GDP has increased, and the level of basic income has increased in Malaysia, but that's not always true in other countries. So there seems to be a bit of a mixture within Southeast Asia as to how these all play out, and that seems to play into a bit into Harvey's theory that way. But I just, I guess I'm not that familiar with Harvey, so it's just an area that I'm just curious about.
That is really interesting. There are countries that are quite improving on the world, but the bad side of that is there is still poor among in this country. Like in the case of the Philippines, we have more gated villages here where you can go to BGC or you can go to other places where you can really see wealthy people here. But the fact is, if you go on the end of the far-fetched part of the Philippines, you can still witness poor people. So there is this wide divide of people that are becoming really very rich, but still there are still many people that are poor. That would be probably the case in Malaysia and other part of the countries, even of course in Japan. That is the development which is not being trickled down to the those people in the bottom, and that is really the problem of globalization. It's not fairly distributed to everyone, but seemingly only few people are getting rich because of this, what Harvey calls an even or asymmetrical condition.
Yeah. Okay. If you'd like to ask a question of Nestor or to make a comment, if you're online, just go down the bottom of your screen and there's a little button that says reactions. And if you push on that, and then it'll say raise hand, I will see your hand and I will call on you to have you respond to that. So are there any questions? Both go ahead, John.
Thank you very much, Nestor, for your provocative presentation. And I agree with very much of it, actually. I know very little about the Philippines, but I can see similar processes at work in this country. And I suspect around the world. I mean, that is the nature of the beast, isn't it? That it is global in its operations. The question is, where do Christians find themselves? Can I first of all ask a personal question? Where do you find your sources of solidarity in this situation? Solidarity with the oppressed.
I think you already provide the answer to that. It was actually first brought out by the prophets, then it was repeated by Jesus, that we always go with the suffering of the oppressed, suffering of those people at the bottom. If you notice, I haven't proposed any solution to the problem I cited, because in the way I am indirectly given already the solution. And that is, of course, to go against exploitation, to go against predatory system. And that's what Jesus was fighting against during his period. And the solidarity we can probably garner is to go together and fight this system. And we really have to go with those victims. We really have to go with the people who suffered under this system. But it is, I think, easy for us to just say this, but the monster, the beast, is now really becoming bigger, and I don't know if we can really amass enough power really to counter this. Just try to imagine that there is a huge gap between the time Jesus opposes the Roman Empire and in our period. And during that period, this accumulation of wealth, this empire keeps on evolving, keeps on changing until now. So we have a big battle in front of us, and I hope we can come up and form a solidarity really to a way to control this monster, or however we call this one.
Behemoth.
Thank you. I'm trying to think of my own personal history here, because I began to be interested in the working classes, the origin of the working classes and trade union movements in the UK beginning in the late 18th century, at the start of the Industrial Revolution, and building right through into the 20th century. And much of that movement had its origins in the free churches, or what we called them in this country the non-conformist churches, because they refused to conform with the established church, the church of the state and the aristocracy and the Anglican Church, in fact. So a lot of the source of their imagery, even of their faith, Christian faith, got fed in to the early trade unionist movement. And then we move forward another 125 years, we find Mrs. Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher, who, when she became Prime Minister in the UK, set out on a deliberate programme of smashing the unions. I think she would have said that openly, and particularly the miners' unions, who had actually held the country to ransom, to be quite fair, in an attempt to win greater, higher wages and so on. But she did succeed in smashing that, and she succeeded, and her followers have destroyed that sense of working class solidarity, a kind of understanding of the dignity of human labor, and the value of working together, solidarity among each other. And that's got destroyed. And now we have something like a gig economy in this country for many people, where everybody is broken down into individuals, and there is, the trade unions have lost a lot of their power. But I'm concerned about this from a Christian perspective. Are there movements, local movements, Christian movements, perhaps in origin, that have pictured or captured this sense of what is happening to them, this sense of a large, incoherent to them, perhaps, power that is operating upon them, a bit like anti-colonial movements, if you like, 100 or 50 years ago. Have you come across those in the Philippines? Are these possible sources from which other Christians can learn when it comes to theologizing about the beast? If I go back to my own history, I found this in many African independent churches, just as an example. But I just wanted to know if there's something similar to that going on in Filipino history.
We have once this liberation struggle during the old Marcos. If you are familiar with once strongman, the tyrant Ferdinand Marcos Sr. He reigned for 20 years, and there were Christians who fought against this reign of Marcos, and they formed this kind of theology called theology of struggle. And it hasn't really developed well. And I'm afraid I would say that we are at least still trying to come up with a new form of solidarity where we can really confront this power. But you know, our history, we had been colonized by Spain for almost 400 years. And after that, of course, comes the Americans and the Japanese. And we have this colonized mentality. And it is, I hope we can really start to form a kind of struggle to confront this. But we're looking for people in the advanced countries, really, for us to come together and help really us to form a solidarity against this power. But I'm not completely pessimist on this, but we are saturated with the power of the market. The military power is different from the market power, because military power tends to coerce us, tends to threaten us. But the market way is not that way. It entices us. It gives us pleasures. It instigates our desires to have more, to participate in the market. It is a different kind of power, and I hope we can have more time to discuss this. And we are not really aware that we are part of the system, and we are playing that kind of system. There are many elite classes in the world. There's religious elite, media elites, political elites, and economic elites. And all other elites are subjugated by the economic elites. Give me 5 names that really have power in the world. None of them are military. All of them are corporate elites. All of them are economic elites. The elites, the market elites are the one controlling the world now, not the military, as I had done in my report. So I think we need more discussion. We need more conversation, really. We have to form solidarity, and we have to really strategize our way of confronting this beast or this monster. It's something really that is rude. We really have to come up with a new way of fighting this. I think Sarah is raising his hand. I know I have not adequately responded to your questions, but this is really something that we really have to search more and look more for it more.
Sarah, do you have a question? You're muted, Sarah, so unmute first.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I don't know whether that is a question or that is a comment. And thank you so much, Nestor. I agree with you, because most of the issues we raise or question we ask, probably you won't have answer. Maybe even neither of us have answer at the moment, because the issue is too complicated, too complex, and it's lots of entangled ideas, lots of entangled things around. And then from the church point of view, the Christianity point of view, sometimes, for example, let's say talking about the colonization issues. And when I'm just looking at when still the West is the empire of knowledge, how can the decolonization happens? And when the majority of us been educated, let's say, within the capitalism power dynamic things, how can we move this giant stone? Or I think it's just, my question is, how can we, and one of the things which I noticed when it comes to the problem of capitalism within the churches in the West, and also the problem of the colonization in relation to the churches in the non-Western country, sadly, because still the power is held within the smaller West. in relation to the money, economic, and knowledge power, and now the media power, all that kind of things. So if the church in this, I mean, in our area needs to move towards a new direction, even, let's say, move from how can the stone of I towards we, still we cannot do it alone. And it has to be together with the Western churches, because they hold more power in lots of different really areas. And even if one person like Nestor to go, how far can you go alone? Or even if you become 5 or 10, still the power holds. I mean, we had a meeting beginning of this year in Dubai, and majority of us were non-Westerns. But when we look around in our group, all of us were educated in the Western education system, in the capitalist education system, in the mentality of individualism system, or these things. I think it is not really an easy issue. And how can we really unite and work together to address this issue is, I found it's extremely challenging. And I'm glad you are speaking up, and at least and people join those voices. Hopefully in the next generation or the generation, we will see some movement, some changes. And so you see, it's not a question really, it's just a kind of wondering. It is extremely important. But it's just, I'm just voicing your concern, actually.
Yes, thank you, Sarah, for the comments. And really, that is the challenge really for us. But we can take advantage of this globalization in a way. We can communicate easier through this kind of platform, so we can start forming solidarity. Really, the world is really complicated. Like here in the Philippines, most of the schools are being owned by billionaires, and they are trying to put aside from the curriculum subjects that are related to critical thinking, subjects are related to history, subjects that are related to social sciences. So the billionaires who own most of the corporations are just trying to shape us and mold us as mere as mere workers for their corporations. So because they have everything, they control everything. Even churches here, mega churches here. As I mentioned to you, most of billionaires are attending mega churches here, and they are being entertained without making them really see what they are doing with the system. They were being awarded. They take advantage of the system, of the rigid system. So I hope we can have more discussion of this, because our work as missionaries is being challenged by this reality. We really have to face this. This is an elephant in the room. But of course, most of us are being, of course, being supported by money coming from our patrons and our donors that are probably part of the system. So that is complicated, as Sarah would mentioned.
Good. Are there any other questions or comments that people have? Well, good. Well, thank you, Nestor, and we really appreciate your commentary on this. I think it's a very important word, and blessings upon you at Penuel School of Theology, and pray that out of that fertile area and thought will come graduates and others that will begin to think about alternatives to just some of the things that we have that we're struggling with internationally, and certainly, especially in terms of market capitalism and imperialism and the enslavement that it represents in so many ways. So again, thank you for joining. And next week we have Paul Bellingham, who is a academic here at Oxford, and we'll be looking forward to that. So with that, we will bid adieu and take care.
Thank you very much. Keep us in your prayer, me and Penuel, our small community. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
All right.
It's a bit